clearing banks, names that we'll all know about, Barclays, Lloyds, Royal Bank of Scotland, really wanted to go into the euro because they thought that was their destiny, and it meant more business for them. But I think I agree with you. I think the nature of the Eurozone and the nature of the European Union is absolutely at the heart of things, because Merkel said famously this week she wanted more Europe. David Cameron implied that he wanted less. And just to give a snapshot, a picture of it, I've just been reading the wires from the meeting today between Merkel and Cameron, and they've been lovey-dovey and friends and, speaking things, but they agreed on nothing. They could not agree on three fundamental things. They couldn't agree that whether they would have a new treaty or a treaty amendment, and we can discuss that, because I think there will be a treaty amendment, and I think it will make for a much smaller European Union, and we'll tease that one out in a minute. They could not agree on the thing that Cameron wants the European Central Bank to do, which is, as you said, Mahed, to print money. And we need to talk a little bit more about Merkel and the German psyche, why they are so dead against printing money, just creating the cash flows to keep Greece and Italy going. And finally, it's another thing, we'll come further down the line because it's the peculiar situation of Britain. Cameron did not agree to a capital transaction tax, which is one way that the Europeans and others across the world think is a way of raising revenue, to give funds to the IMF or wherever, or the support fund, in order to fund these desperate countries like Italy and Greece. So, with that, I'm saying that they fundamentally disagreed about where to go. Are we really seeing the beginning of the end of this phase of the European Union? Can you see a major discussion now coming up about breaking the treaties, creating a new form of Europe?
Well, potentially, yes. I think it's very early stage to talk about such fundamental transformations. But I think if this crisis deepens, and I think if the potential solutions to this crisis become ever more divergent. You just touched upon that, the fact that Merkel wants more Europe, Cameron wants less, presumably Sarkozy and the others are somewhere in the middle, veering towards the Germans, of course. As these kind of worldviews become more divergent, then yes, I think a few years from now we get to a point where you can think about transforming the European Union. And I think that will certainly, whatever the outcome, I can be confident enough at this stage to say that will strengthen the British position, to have a European Union that is concerned first and foremost with economic and financial issues, but even there it kind of tones down some of the ambitions. And I think at the heart of this is the euro. Now, currently, the UK is committed to the euro survival. The UK doesn't want to have anything to do with the euro as far as adopting it is concerned. But both the government and also people in the opposition, and also the elites writ large. I mean, you had Tony Blair a week or so ago saying it would be a catastrophe if the euro was to collapse. And I think he's certainly articulating the view of the establishment as a whole, in my view. You may have a different opinion on that.
That's clearly right.
I think, the UK at this stage anyway is committed to the euro survival. But if the UK was to revise that position, and if the euro struggled even further, I mean, this is just one crisis. We're going to have more, I think. Either this one deepens, or we have to grapple with several others before we reach calm waters, if you like. But it's too early to talk about transformations, but I think we may eventually get there. And of course, and I hope we have time in this program to talk about some of the issues. Now, if that was to happen, then clearly the Atlanticist bond, for instance, between the UK and the USA, and also between the USA and some of the other European countries, USA and France, will that strengthen? What's the role of China in all this? What is the geopolitical impact globally?
That is indeed where we're going. I mean, but just to say that really the two prongs of our discussion must be that, and it must be the social effect within the communities of all these countries. This thing, as you were saying, this scepticism about the way things are being run. But I just wanted to pursue you on where Britain's position is, because I'm slightly more critical than you are, curiously, of this, because I think they've got themselves into a terrible mess. Because, only Britain could have a coalition where one part, the junior partner, the Liberal Democrats are very pro-Europe, and on the whole, the Conservatives, I don't know whether you would agree with this, Jeremy, are becoming increasingly sceptical. But if there is a change in the treaty, and it won't only happen in Britain, I think it would certainly happen in Italy, it may even happen in Germany, and it would happen in France, it would certainly happen in Ireland, there would have to be a referendum. If there was a fundamental change, then that could be the real breakup of British politics as we see it. It could have I wouldn't say a catastrophic effect, only in terms of physics. I'm not making any moral. It's like a catastrophic breakup of an aircraft in mid-air. Yes. I can see that happening.
I don't see that coming. You know, the economic union, which Britain's been part of now for 40 years, is pretty solidly stable and beneficial. And if you're my age or so, you know just how much wealthier the country's got in the last 40 years. You know, yes, there is a moment of reckoning now for Europe, but we have to, looking at Western Europe generally, we have to acknowledge that since the early 80s, it's been a very prosperous story almost all the time. And Ireland and other countries have had enormous booms on the fringe. These countries will make their own choice, and it will be between dropping out on some terms or other, or handing over fiscal policy making to the centre. And I mean, it's going to be a very tough choice to make. And I suspect, as we've seen in Greece and Italy just in the last week or two, probably when push comes to shove, people will vote to be in the rich man's club. And in my view, the reason why Mr. Putin is so concerned is he's just seen his long-term game plan evaporate. I think his view was that in the end Russia too would be part of this great European conglomeration, and obviously that is now off the agenda.
And he, within the wider Russia and the wider sphere of influence, the former Russian republics, particularly in Central Asia, which I've been looking at a lot, Kazakhstan is a great prize, and things are going very badly, and they're going very badly for Russian interests there. I agree, and that is the way Putin, in his way, in his terms, not in Merkel's terms, would like to be more European.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. It's a rich man's club. Yeah. After all, that's the bottom line.
Just to follow this through, combining the two strands, last week, because there's a new one since, The Economist did a special supplement about the crisis in the zone, and the longest essay in the supplement was about extreme politics, the way that politics were in many countries, and the euro is only part of it, I agree, demographic change, other things, minority groups, migration and so on, but I do see something to their argument of the centre not holding. This is the thing that worries me about this country. I think we're going to get crackpot politics on the right. Because you know, when I go into now very changing new communities in the Midlands and in the North, Burnley, Preston, you see that, you know, the BNP, the EDL.
But in British politics, the far right do come and go. They came and went in the 1970s, in the immediate aftermath of Britain joining Europe. They came and went in the 30s with Oswald Mosley. Britain is a profoundly liberal country, in my view, and so I think the far right is never going to get a lot of support. It's nothing like the problem that it is in France, for example.
Not even a little bit of entryism into the Conservative Party?
Well, yes. I mean, let's be candid. I'm somebody who votes for whoever can beat the Conservative. That's my position.
You and me both.
But no. I mean, you know, the damage in the Tory Party in relation to Europe was largely done to Mrs. Thatcher. It's ancient history, I think.
Yeah.
I think on that note specifically, I think I would agree with Jeremy's point that the UK is perhaps more resilient to extreme politics than some of the mainland European countries. But I don't think we can be complacent. And some of the rise in the so-called crackpot groups, as you put them, predates this crisis. I mean, the EDL is now several years old, and its primary or its principal self-declared raison d'etre is to combat so-called the Islamization of the UK. I mean, that is their narrative.
Yes.
Now, thank God they're very silly. I don't know if you've seen their spokesman on TV, but they're absolutely awful. I mean, they make the BNP look like, you know, hardcore intellectuals. That's how.
But they are taking a lot of support in some parts of the Midlands and the North.
They are,
this is not specifically about.
Well, what's
EDL,
really disturbing from my point of view is the size of these EDL rallies. They're quite significant.
Yes.
I mean, they bring about thousands upon thousands of people, and that makes me very nervous, both as a British citizen but also as an ethnic minority living in this country. It makes me extremely nervous that there are elements in UK society that can be mobilised. And I think if they can mobilise a few thousand people under present conditions, let's say the situation worsens considerably in the years to come, then presumably those numbers will mushroom. Then we'll get tens of thousands. And I think that's where real problems arise. So I don't think we can be complacent. Yes, historically, we've been more resistant to extreme politics than Germany, for certain, France, and others. But I think there's ample scope in this country for extreme politics.
And the centre not holding.
Well,
the centre's very strong.
The centre will hold.
Yes, you're more confident than I am.
In February 2003, as we saw war looming in Iraq,
and we all marched.
There were 1.25 million of us on the streets of London.
I think rather more than that. I think.
Well,
I
was
I agree with you.
Trying to choose a fairly cautious number, but over 1 million people. This is very, very significant.
Yeah.
And when it comes to in the 70s. Period of far right activity in the UK, the young people formed the Anti-Nazi League, and against the thousands of extremists, there were tens of thousands of young students coming out to protest.
Well, I mean, we've had the very steady rise of the BNP over the past few
British
years.
National Party.
Indeed.
We should explain to
the
our viewers.
point that even the extremely politically correct BBC brought Nick Griffin on Question Time, and that was very interesting, I thought. But if the BNP continues on that trajectory of a very, very slow rise, I think combined with some of the other forces and phenomena that we've been discussing, and let's say 10, 15 years from now, we're in an even more difficult situation, I think it's at that point that you can begin to worry. But I agree with you, broadly speaking, that the centre will hold. I don't think we can go for doomsday scenarios just yet.
London is one of the most, is possibly the most diverse city in the world.
It's no man's land.
I agree. And it's the cultural capital of the world in terms of cosmopolitan culture.
Someone described it as no man's land.
Yes, absolutely.
I think
but coming from a Eurotrash family, I rather welcome it. Can I draw this together? I mean, I don't want to stop you because I want you to go on for a bit, because then we will go into the second half of our discussion, leading off from America and then to social phenomena. But Mahan, I'm very struck by your line here, and I'd like you to put, not a line in the sand, but a flag in the map.
Yeah.
I mean, the notion which you might get in some of the narratives that you get on various chat rooms and websites from around the world, that this is sort of a rerun, but all the values turned upside down, of Fukuyama's The End of History, that this is the end of the system, the liberal, open society system as we know it, that something is about to crack and shatter in the kind of liberal democratic models that you get predominantly in Europe, but in America, North and South. That's far too apocalyptic, isn't it?
Well, I think so, especially in view of the resilience of the political systems in the West. These are systems that have been in evolution now for hundreds of years, both from as economic systems, first and foremost, but also as the political infrastructure on top of it. And I think it's very hard to imagine how a crisis of this scale, it's a very big crisis, but it's not cataclysmic. But I think even in a cataclysmic scenario, I would think that the current system would be able to weather the storm simply because by default, I mean, there really is no alternative, is there, to the system that we have right now. That alternative may arise at some point in the future, but currently, by a very broad consensus amongst the elite, amongst academics, amongst all strata of society, if you like, there is a broadly held consensus that the current system, for all its faults, is probably the best. Now I admit there are a substantial number of people who disagree with that, and I think certainly some of the radical fringe of these social protest movements in America and in Europe, including here in our country, they would hold a different view, that the current system should be overthrown and something else should take its place. But these are still forces